point, we're going to get started, and I welcome Assemblymember Jose Medina, who's going to kick us off. Oh, you need to unmute.
Welcome again, colleagues, teacher representatives, student representatives, members of the press, and those watching online. Before we get started, I'd like to take a point of personal privilege and congratulate our Vice President Biden's selection for Vice President, United States Senator Kamala Harris. I believe her selection as Vice President on the ticket shows how far we've come as a nation, but also a reminder of how far we still have to go. So again, thank you all for being here this afternoon and to talk about and to share why AB 331, making ethnic studies a high school graduation requirement, is so important to get passed and signed by the governor this year. After a few setbacks, I feel that today we are poised to lead the nation in educational equity for all students and become the first state to require ethnic studies as a high school graduation requirement. And before we begin to hear from my colleagues and students and teachers, I want to take just a couple of minutes to mention how it is that we've got here to this point today, ready to make ethnic studies a graduation requirement. 52 years ago, in 1968, when I was a freshman in high school students in East LA school district marched out of the classroom, boycotted class to make sure that education was equal and culturally relevant. Working with then high school teacher Sal Castro, making pretty much the same demands that students have been making for the last 52 years. Also in that same year, 1968, students at San Francisco State University led the longest strike in the nation's history, calling for the same thing, moving away from an Eurocentric curriculum, calling for more representation and diversity in classes, calling for the creation of ethnic studies college and ethnic studies degree. So we are here today after 52 years of struggle by students, activists, teachers, college professors, all saying the same thing, that we can do a better job than we've done in the past and make our curriculum more reflective. So with that, I again thank you all for being here, and we'll go on now to hearing from our student and then teacher. Thank you.
Thank you. So I now introduce our first speaker, Naya Story from Californians for Justice youth leader and also a student at Oakland High School. Thanks, Anaya.
Hello, everyone. My name is Naya Story, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a youth leader for Californians for Justice, and I'm also a junior at Oakland High School. As a Black and Filipina individual, I've never truly felt represented in the school history curriculum. From kindergarten to 8th grade, I attended school in Dublin, California, which is an upper middle class suburban area in the East Bay. At school, there weren't many students or teachers that looked like me, and the lack of representation in the history books made me feel like an outsider. Almost every year, we learn about the same Eurocentric history. We are taught that Columbus discovered the Americas, even though there are already millions of Native people living here. We are taught that the Emancipation Proclamation freed all the enslaved people when it only freed those who were enslaved in the Confederate States. We are taught that the 4th of July is our Independence Day, but ignore the fact that women and Black people were not included in this independence. I've had a middle school history teacher tell me that the slaves had a choice. Why is it I only learned about Juneteenth this year? We spend so much time learning about American independence and neglect to acknowledge the independence of non-white Americans. We are tired of spending every year learning about one group of Americans and not the rest of us. As a Black identifying individual, I do not feel complete internally. I don't know what country my people come from. A part of my identity is missing. When I open a history book, I see my people in chains and with scars down their back. With ethnic studies, I'll finally be able to feel whole. I'll be able to understand the people I may have come from as people and not slaves. Additionally, ethnic studies can help dismantle prejudice. We'll learn about history from a variety of perspectives. Right now, the Black Lives Matter movement is going on, and it's the biggest movement in my lifetime. There are too many people blind to systemic racism and the inequalities people of color face. With ethnic studies, we will all have an understanding of diverse backgrounds and how the tragedies and hardships of different ethnic groups still affect those groups today. Ethnic studies should be required to graduate because if we are required to take Eurocentric history, the same Eurocentric history almost every single year, 1 year of ethnic studies should not be a problem because ethnic studies is US history. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Anaya. I now welcome Pia Van Meter, science teacher and EL coordinator in the Riverside Unified School District.
Good afternoon. My name is Pia Van Meter, and I'm a high school science teacher with the Riverside Unified School District and a proud member of the California Teachers Association. You might be wondering, what is a science teacher doing here talking about importance of ethnic studies, requirements? Well, I wear several hats. As a science teacher, ethnic studies not only impact my classroom, but impacts the entire school, communities, and environments where our students live. I teach a very diverse population of students, many who are English learners. What's become increasingly obvious lately is that our country has a lot to learn about its own history. As a society, we're not done the best job in ensuring that the last couple of generations really understand the experiences and contributions of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Change will not come without awareness and understanding. That is why CTA is supporting AB 331 by Assemblymember Medina, which will ensure that all students have the opportunity to take an ethnic studies class by making it a graduation requirement. With our growing state and nation, the subject of ethnic studies is too important to be left as an option. When students learn to appreciate diverse histories and experiences, it makes them well-rounded individuals. They also become more self-aware, empathetic, understanding, and civically engaged citizens of the world. In addition to being a science teacher, I'm actively involved with my union. I am the chair of the Curriculum Instructions Committee at CTA. My committee recommended a support position for AB 331. Just the other day, I was reviewing the second draft of the Ethics Studies Model Curriculum, which would provide a rich and authentic curriculum for our diverse student population. This curriculum will be the first statewide curriculum in the country and should stand true to its guiding principles of delivering the promise of equity and access for all students. Currently, our national climate looks grim, but the future doesn't have to be. Students look to us to lead by example, and in this means, we must do the impactful and life-saving work of building awareness and compassion through the stories of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We have a chance of making the world a better place today. It all starts with our students. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Our next speaker is Assemblymember David Chu, chair of the California API Legislative Caucus.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing me to say a few words. And let me first thank our colleague, Assemblymember Jose Medina, for his leadership. And I am honored to be part of the diversity of the world represented in our Democratic colleagues in the legislature in our support for this. We all know at this moment in time, the recent protests, the dialogue around racism and structural issues within so many systems in our country has demonstrated the need for all of us to have a better understanding of the diversities of our communities. And I also want to just note that these are protests that have been educated by ethnic studies. I represent San Francisco, where decades ago, for the first time, students at SF State pushed for ethnic studies at San Francisco State. And these are students, young people who, because of their work, have benefited all of us. And I will say, I would not have become an activist early in my life without the education that I received around the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Japanese American internment, or the murder of Vincent Chin. We all know how critical ethnic studies are, particularly for younger students, to introduce them to new perspectives, to help our students develop critical thinking. And we also have seen the studies about the impact of these curriculums on positive academic and social outcomes for our students. And I certainly join the chorus in saying that in our diverse state of California, we need this bill to ensure that all of our students have the education they need to be able to succeed and thrive and build on the inclusive state of California. And so I look forward to hopefully getting this done, getting it over the line, and ensuring that our next generation of leaders in our state, again, reflect the incredible diversity that is California. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Our next speaker is Assemblymember Lorena Gonzalez, Chair of the California Latino Legislative Caucus.
Thank you. And it's so nice to see so many of our members engaged on this. The California Legislative Latino Caucus has been working on trying to get ethnic studies in our high school for almost, it seems like a decade now. And we're grateful, of course, to Assemblymember Medina for really pushing and pushing. As somebody who taught our kids, Jose Medina understands why we need this so desperately in the classroom and why we need it for every single high schooler in California. And, you know, I think we need to listen to teachers, to people who are touching the lives of our kids every day, who understand the connection between teaching ethnic studies and their success overall. That's what we need. And then for the rest of us who, you know, I think have witnessed the justified civil unrest in this country and things going on, young people in particular seeking out a new direction, realize that this will benefit all Californians as individuals learn about not only their own ethnic history, but the struggle of so many of our communities. This is going to benefit us all. But it's not going to be easy to get this through in this last couple weeks and get it signed. It's a commitment that we have obviously worked so hard on, but one which we're going to need a lot of people to help out in these next few weeks to ensure that it gets through the Senate, to ensure that it gets to the governor's desk and that he signs it. I don't know of a time when you can imagine that this has been more important. This is our time. We can't wait another year. As we've been asked to do so many times in the past. So with that, I want to thank Assemblymember Medina for his strong leadership and his push. And I just want to hope that we can all come together to really ensure that this happens this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Assemblymember Reggie Sawyer, a member of the California Legislative Black Caucus. Oh, sir, you need to unmute.
How about that?
Perfect.
Am I unmuted?
You're good. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. All this stuff is new to me. It's definitely a pleasure to be here, but more important, as you can see with the powerful women behind me, Coretta Scott King and Dolores Huerta, it also shows with ethnic studies how we can come together and how people like in Washington are trying to keep us apart. African-American Latinos through ethnic studies can show how we're much more alike and how we need to come together. And this is my history lesson, I am a father for the day, for example, in Los Angeles, I've always thought Los Angeles was founded mostly by white people. But of the 44 original colonists who founded Los Angeles, only 2 were white. Of the other 42, 26 had some degree of African ancestry, and of the 16 were Indians or mestizos, people of mixed Spanish and Indian blood. So even in my own city, I didn't know that African Americans were part of the rich heritage of Los Angeles, and that Native Americans were part of the rich and tapestry of Los Angeles and having it grow there. I have a pillow in my office, and people always ask, who is that African American? Who's that African? And I tell them, you do know he's the first Black governor of California. You do know he was one of the wealthiest men in California. You do know he built the first hotel in Los Angeles, and his name is Pio Pico. Didn't speak a lick of English, but he was in Alta California, was one of the first African descent governors of California. That's why we need ethnic studies, because it will show not only the rich history of everyone, will show how all of our histories blend together. And we're the ones that made California great. And so that's why I am unbelievably in favor of this, because it has more ramifications for unifying than we ever knew before once we get ethnic studies in the classroom. So thank you. And thank you, Mr. Medina, for taking this on.
Thank you so much. Up next, we have Assemblymember James Ramos, Chair of the Select Committee on Native American Affairs.
Well, thank you. And I, first of all, want to thank Assemblymember Medina for putting ethnic studies together and for bringing the vital information that's needed in the state of California. And I want to thank the student speaker who recognized that when Christopher Columbus came over, there was already people here in the United States. And even to push that a little bit farther, here to the state of California, the mission system under Juan Pedro Sierra did far more destruction and genocide towards the California people. These types of discussions should be part of an ethnic studies moving forward. An ethnic studies that starts to give the factual account of California's first people with some of the things we just talked about, but also talking about the atrocities during the creation of the state of California and how bounties were put out on California Indian people. These are issues that we need to start addressing and to have factual accounts of history into our educational system. And some have asked, well, why should we go that far back in history in the state of California? And the reason we have to go back is to start the healing process of what's gone on in the state of California. Certainly in this time and in this age, in this era, we see that frustration that has built up over all these years. We see the different impacts on the statues being pulled down. We don't condone all that, but we do need to have a discussion on why that frustration is there and the reason why we have to go back to the beginning of the state of California, even before the United States rule. We have to go back that far to educate our system. I grew up on the Salmon Indian Reservation. I still reside there. And in school, when we went to school, they would play music, drum songs, and they would ask us, well, what do these songs mean? And we're Serrano and Cahuilla. We use gourd rattles and elderberry flutes, hoofs of animals for our songs. We didn't know that song because that song was from a tribe from the Midwest of the United States. And when we couldn't say what that song meant, the teachers said, well, sit down, you must not be Indian enough. These are the reasons why we need to get behind ethnic studies, to change the perspective of those that are out there thinking one way of how California Indian people have become. We need to make sure we get that factual account of who we are. Ethnic studies is a step in the right direction. I say a step because this can't be just the first step. It's a long process to make sure we correct everybody's history that's on this call and on this Zoom press conference here. So on behalf of the California Indian people, I want to thank Assemblymember Medina for moving ethnic studies forward. And I encourage letters to come in and for people to call in to support this bill as we continue to move California forward and give the factual participation and the factual cultural activities that are here in the state of California.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Assemblymember Christina Garcia.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone who's here today. I'm here to urge the Senate and the governor to support AB 331, which would mandate ethnic studies as a high school graduation requirement. And like our previous teacher, I'm a math teacher, and you might be wondering why I'm here, but as an educator, I know how important it is that our students see themselves in the textbooks and that our accurate histories are being told, and that only makes us better in all of our other subject matters out there. Over the last 2 months, we have seen a racial reckoning triggered by the killing of George Floyd. The public continues to protest because they're rightfully demanding change, demanding that racial biases be turned down, starting with our police departments, but really demanding that racial biases be turned down in all of our systems. Coronavirus has also exposed the interconnectedness of human vulnerability and the vast inequities people of color face simply for their race. The video of George Floyd dying and the pandemic has pricked our consciousness as a society, but we need to ensure that it doesn't take more dead people and people of color to prick our consciousness and to move us into action. And this is why AB 331 is so important. It's because ethnic studies will allow us to prick the students' consciousness in a better way. Our schools are not just teaching students subject matters, but teaching them how to be change agents and how to be the leaders our community needs. AB 331 is a clear way and a great way to make sure that we're pricking our students' consciousness before they enter adulthood and before we have to see any more videos of people dying. We as legislators have a responsibility to not just say we stand with marginalized groups or to post our support on social media, but a responsibility to legislate to ensure we're moving our society forward and answering the cries for justice we have been hearing over the last 2 months, but really over all of our lifetimes. This is a moment we must seize and strive to better understand each other, to learn from each other, and to recognize the awesome contributions so many of our communities have given to the society. It's an incredible opportunity to teach our future students what our real history is. Whether it be good, bad, or ugly, we need to make sure we're teaching them an accurate history. I want to thank Assemblymember Jose Medina and all the advocates for their leadership and their tenacious work to ensure that this issue continues and that we don't give up. It's key that we all reach out to our chair of appropriations and our governor, and we make it clear that the time is now to pass AB 331 and ensure we have ethnic studies in our high schools. It's a time for us to answer the cries for justice in a meaningful way by passing AB 331. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Assemblymember Eduardo Garcia.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to say a few words. I want to just acknowledge all of the powerful words and messages that we are hearing from our colleagues and the student, along with our teacher who's here in support of this effort. I do want to just acknowledge, of course, the work of Assemblymember Medina that goes back several decades to the classroom, to the communities of the Inland Empire, and now as a legislator continuing to stay focused on the issues that are important to the people of California. And in this case, we're talking about ethnic studies. There are a lot of school districts up and down the state, including those in my district. Coachella Valley Unified School District comes to mind, where the leadership there have bought into the idea and the importance that's been discussed today of teaching ethnic studies. And I want to recognize their work, the faculty, the students, their thirst for continuing to educate the community about the importance of diversity. Ethnic studies is extremely important to me on a personal level, as I would share an awakening of understanding of who we are, where we come from, and the history that comes with all that. As my colleague Cristina Garcia said, the good, the bad, and the ugly, that is important for people to know. And so for personal reasons, as well as what we've seen in our school districts, ethnic studies can change lives. It is about self-determination, self-empowerment, and ultimately cultural understanding. As Mr. Reggie Jones, our colleague, said, bringing people together, understanding where we come from. And those are different walks of life. But today we're here to talk about why AB 3301 is important and why we need to get our Senate, the chair of appropriations, and his colleagues to stand with us and support this effort to make this a law so that it becomes a requirement throughout the entire state of California. Again, I just want to recognize all of the powerful words and messages that our colleagues have shared with us today. Thank you, Mr. Medina, for your leadership. And for those who have been shepherding this conversation even before us, recognizing folks and friends like Luis Alejo, former chair of the caucus, who's been playing an advisory role to many of us as it relates to the strategies that we want to move forward with to be successful getting this bill to the governor's desk. So, Mr. Medina, my hat's off to you and all of our colleagues for the strong messages that you convey today to Californians in your support for AB 301. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next is Assemblymember Robert Rivas.
Yes, so it's great to be here with you all, and I as well would like to thank Assemblymember Medina. Thank him for, he has dedicated his career to improving the lives of students across our state. I want to thank him for authoring this important piece of legislation and championing this issue. And so prior to my time here in the State Assembly, as I am a new member, I was a member of the Board of Supervisors in the County of San Benito, and I also had 2 other jobs to support my family. I taught poli-sci at a local junior college, and I was also a student support manager at a very large comprehensive high school. Working in education has been certainly one of the most rewarding experiences of my professional life. In fact, I come from a family of educators. My mom, her sisters have spent their entire lives in the classroom as school teachers. And so I understand and I have seen firsthand the influence that educators and curriculum have on our youth, which is why I think Assembly Bill 331 is such an important bill. You see, my family immigrated to California from Mexico. My grandfather, who raised me along with my grandmother and my mom, who's a single parent, they taught me to always respect our family's history, to respect our heritage. And it was my grandfather who taught me the value and importance of hard work, of working hard in school, and to always fight for the rights of others. And he taught me that because that's what he did. Against all odds, alongside Dolores Huerta, alongside Cesar Chavez, my grandfather fought and won equal rights, better working conditions in the fields for he and his fellow coworkers. It is essential that our state's youth be afforded every single opportunity to learn about our diverse civil rights leaders. Leaders like Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez, as well as more generally about the history, accomplishments, and contributions of other races, ethnicities, and cultures. By learning about other people's histories through an ethnic studies course will make it just a little bit easier for our young people to put themselves in someone else's shoes. And this is important. It is important because learning more about others increases our empathy. It increases our empathy as people, as neighbors, as voters, as leaders, and as policy makers. As educators, the stories that we tell about the past, the heroes we choose and the ones we ignore, tell our children what is important about the present and what is important about our future. It is our diversity is absolutely what has always made California a great place to live. We should embrace our diversity and our incredible history, past, present, and future. We must get Assembly Bill 331 passed. Again, I thank Assemblymember Medina for always putting students first and reminding us all of the rich heritage we all share as Californians. Thank you all.
Thank you. Up next is Assemblymember Freddie Rodriguez. Oops, sorry, sir, you're on mute. Hold on, we'll send in some tech assistance. Christian, do you think you can unmute the assembly member?
Yeah, I'm working on that right now. You want to skip to the next speaker, if that's okay, for the moment?
I believe he is our last speaker.
It's at the bottom, Freddie.
There it
Hello,
is.
got it? You got it?
There it is.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank Assemblymember Medina. I appreciate you for bringing this bill forward and really bringing this strong group of members and colleagues throughout California to support this bill and the importance why we need it. One of the most important reasons why this bill is important, not only to California, but to the Inland Empire, because it's about all of us. I think back to my own upbringing in the city of Pomona, and I've always wondered that something was missing, right? There's something more about history of culture and like diversity, but we never had the opportunity to explore it. I feel that what our students learn in school is very important for decades and generations, for many years to come across this country. I think about my grandkids that are in school. We need bills like this so that way when they get to further their education in junior high and high school, that they see about how important our background, our history is and how rich it is and where we are and really where we need to go. Also with AB 331, Assemblymember Medina has been a champion. He's been talking about this for the last 2-3 years, it seems like. Everywhere he goes, it's ethnic studies and how important it is across the board. And he's built a strong group of support around it. And as chair of the Inland Empire Caucus, I've seen how much he is engaged in our communities to make sure he gets it right. I want to be able to thank everybody once again for supporting this bill and supporting you, Assemblymember Medina, for all the hard work you've been putting into this day in and day out. And really, I want to advocate that we get everybody on board and call our senators to let them know how important this bill is, to get it out and ultimately get it to the governor and call the governor and let him know how important it is, not only for this year, but for the whole state and this nation. And once again, I look at this bill as being something essential. We talk about essential workers and everything we're doing. Well, you know what? To me, Assembly Bill 331 is essential. And I want to thank everybody for supporting it and being here with our colleagues and you, Assemblymember Medina. Thank you once again for all the hard work you've done on this bill. And let's take it to the governor and get it signed. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will send it back to Assemblymember Jose Medina for closing comments.
Well, I don't think there is much for me left to be said because I thank my colleagues, teacher representative, student who have said it much better than I could ever say it. It's clear that this is legislation that is needed. I thank all my colleagues, California Teachers Association, for their support. And as they said, the job now is to make the calls, making sure that the bill gets out of appropriation and that we get it voted out of the Senate floor and onto the governor. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Kelly.
Great, thank you. So at this time, if we have any reporters on, we open it up for Q&A. If you have a question, if you could write it or jot down that you have a question in the chat box, and I will call on you to ask your question. Just remember to unmute yourself when you ask. So let's just take a minute here. I'll give it just another minute or two in case anyone's furiously typing. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So at this point, I will leave it for, thank you all for joining us today. If there's anything else that you'd like to add, Mr. Medina, you're welcome to at this time, but I think we appreciate everyone's time and for joining us.
No, with that, I just thank everyone and as